The meal was still warm when Brenna Murphy found it sitting on the employee break room counter, steam curling from beneath the foil-wrapped plate like a question she didn't know how to answer. 3 nights in a row now, always between her first and second shift, always exactly the kind of food that reminded her of home before everything fell apart. Tonight it was shepherd's pie, the crust golden and perfect, with carrots glazed in butter alongside it, real food, the kind that took time and attention. She stood there in her grease-stained uniform, her feet screaming in her worn sneakers, and felt something dangerous prick behind her eyes. Pride warred with exhaustion, gratitude fought with fear. Someone was watching her closely enough to know her schedule down to the 15-minute break between her double shifts at Nora's diner. Someone knew she barely ate anymore, surviving on stale coffee and whatever mistakes the kitchen would let her take home. Someone saw her, and that terrified her more than anything. "You gonna eat that or just stare at it?" Marco called from the kitchen, his voice crackling with the permanent hoarseness of a lifetime smoker. Brenna wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the August heat that turned the diner into a sweat box. "Did you see who left it?" "Nope, showed up same as before." Marco shrugged, scraping down the griddle. "You got a secret admirer with a key to the back door, apparently. You want me to start locking it?" She should say yes. Instead, she found herself shaking her head, reaching for the plate with hands that trembled slightly. The scent hit her as she peeled back the foil rosemary and thyme, rich gravy, the comfort of something made with care. Her stomach clenched with sudden, desperate hunger. When had she last eaten? Yesterday morning, maybe. A granola bar at Ethan's bedside in the hospital, trying to smile while the monitors beeped their steady rhythm and her little brother slept through another round of medications they couldn't afford. She ate, standing up, fork from the diner's own collection, and tried not to cry. The Vampire King watched from across the street, hidden in shadows that bent to his will like courtiers bowing before a throne. Isidor Nightwell had ruled the Eastern Territories for 3 centuries. He commanded the loyalty of 200 vampires, controlled property worth billions in human currency, and could trace his bloodline back to the first turning, when the Ancient Ones had walked openly under stars that no longer existed. He had negotiated treaties that prevented wars. He had executed traitors without hesitation. He had built an empire in the darkness between human knowledge and supernatural truth. And he was completely, pathetically undone by a 24-year-old waitress with dark circles under her green eyes and a smile she forced for customers who never tipped enough. "This is becoming a problem, my lord," Cassian spoke from 2 steps behind him, as protocol demanded. His lieutenant's voice carried the careful neutrality of someone delivering unwelcome news. "The court has noticed your absences." Let them notice. Isidor didn't look away from the diner's lit windows. He could see her through the glass even at this distance, could count the freckles across her nose if he wanted, could hear her heartbeat, that steady drum that had somehow become the rhythm his unbeating heart followed. "They're calling it an obsession." "It is an obsession." Cassian fell silent. Isidor appreciated that about him. He knew when to stop talking. It was a rare quality, even among vampires who had centuries to learn discretion. He'd first seen Brenna Murphy 4 months ago, walking past one of his properties during an inspection. She'd been leaving the hospital at sunrise, still wearing her diner uniform, exhaustion carved into every line of her body. Something about the set of her shoulders, proud despite the obvious weight she carried, had made him stop, made him watch, made him follow, just once, to understand. Now he knew her schedule better than she probably did herself. Monday through Saturday, first shift starting at 8 in the evening, straight through until 2 in the morning, 30-minute break, then back until 8 in the morning. Sundays she worked a single shift so she could spend the day at Mercy General Hospital, where her 18-year-old brother Ethan was slowly dying of something the doctors called manageable with enough money, which meant not manageable at all for a girl paying out of pocket, while insurance companies found creative reasons to deny claims. She slept 4 hours a day, maybe. She smiled at customers who spoke rudely to her. She never took the tips other waitresses stole from her section. She tied her dark hair back in a bun that was falling apart by hour 3 of every shift, and she'd worn through the heel of her left shoe so badly she was walking at a slight angle. Isidor had killed men for far less than making someone like her invisible. The council meets in 3 nights, Cassian continued quietly. There are concerns about your judgment, about whether this human represents a liability. Anyone who touches her answers to me personally. Isidor's voice dropped into registers that made windows rattle. Make that extremely clear. My lord, I have, but Victor has been asking questions. He's been watching your assets, looking for patterns. If he connects you to the diner, to the girl, then I'll remove Victor from the council. He has allies. The old families don't like change, and a vampire king showing this much interest in a single mortal reads as weakness to them. They remember the last time one of us fell for a human. They remember how that story ended. Isidor finally turned to face his lieutenant. Cassian was old enough to know better than to flinch, but something in his eyes acknowledged the danger of this conversation. That story ended because Aldrich was a fool who tried to turn her without permission and started a war. I am not Aldrich. I am not asking permission, and I am not turning her. Then what are you doing? It was the question that had haunted him for months. What was he doing, leaving meals like some lovesick boy? What did he think would happen that she'd somehow sense him through the food, divine his intentions through shepherd's pie and roasted chicken? He was a king. He commanded empires, and he was terrified of speaking to one exhausted human girl because he didn't know how to explain that he'd spent 4 months memorizing the cadence of her laughter, rare as it was, that he'd bought the diner 3 months ago through shell companies specifically to stop a chain from acquiring it and firing half the staff, that he'd anonymously paid off 2 months of her brother's hospital bills, only for new ones to pile up just as fast, that he'd learned to cook, actually cook, something he hadn't done since he was human, just so he could leave her things that didn't taste like restaurant takeout. I'm taking care of her, he said finally. She doesn't know that. She doesn't know you exist. I know, Cassian sighed, a very human gesture for a vampire who hadn't been human in 200 years. This can't continue as it is. Eventually, you'll have to make a choice, reveal yourself, or step back. The middle ground you're standing on is eroding, and when it collapses, it will take both of you down. Isidor looked back at the diner. Brenna was clearing tables now, moving with the efficiency of someone too tired to waste motion. Even exhausted, she was graceful. Even worn down, she was beautiful. I know that too. The confrontation happened on the 4th night, and it was entirely his own fault. Isidor had grown careless, or perhaps some part of him wanted to be caught, wanted the excuse to finally speak to her. Either way, he was still in the break room when she came through the back door 15 minutes early, and there was nowhere to hide that wouldn't look more suspicious than simply standing there. So he stood there, one hand still on the plate he'd just set down chicken marsala tonight, with green beans and roasted potatoes, and met her eyes as she froze in the doorway. For a moment, neither of them moved. She was prettier up close, even with exhaustion bruising the skin under her eyes. The photos his surveillance had provided didn't capture the exact shade of her hair, deep brown with amber undertones that caught the fluorescent light. Didn't capture the way her chin lifted when she was surprised, an instinctive defiance that made something warm unfurl in his chest. Who are you? Her voice was steady, but he could hear her heartbeat accelerating, not with attraction, with anger. Have you been leaving these? He could lie, could compel her to forget she'd ever seen him, rewrite this moment into something harmless. The power was there, readily available, humming through his blood like a familiar song. He didn't reach for it. Yes. His own voice came out rougher than intended. He'd practiced this conversation 100 times in his head, and now every planned word had evaporated. Why? She stepped fully into the room, letting the door swing shut behind her. Brave or foolish or too tired to be properly cautious. Is this some kind of game, some rich guy thing where you get off on charity cases? The accusation stung more than it should have. No. Then what? Because I don't know you, and you clearly know enough about me to have my entire schedule memorized, and that's, she gestured sharply at the plate, words tumbling faster now. That's creepy. That's stalker behavior, and I can't afford to deal with this right now. I can't afford the distraction or the worry or whatever game you're playing, so just stop. Please, just stop. Her voice cracked on the last word, and Isidor felt something in his chest crack with it. I'm not playing a game. He kept his hands visible, non-threatening, every instinct screaming at him to close the distance between them and also to run before he made this worse. I saw you needed help. I wanted to help. You don't even know me. I know you work 16-hour shifts 6 days a week. I know you spend your only day off at the hospital. I know you haven't bought yourself new shoes in months because every extra dollar goes to medical bills. I know you're drowning, and everyone around you is too busy to notice. And He stopped himself, but not soon enough. You what? Isidor had negotiated with ancient vampires who would kill him for showing weakness, had faced down challenges to his authority with nothing but will and violence, had survived 3 centuries of supernatural politics where one misstep meant death. He had no idea how to finish that sentence. I couldn't stop noticing, he said finally, quietly. I tried. This isn't what I do, but I couldn't stop seeing you. Brenna stared at him, and he could see her mind working, processing, trying to sort him into a category that made sense. Good guy, bad guy, dangerous, safe. He didn't fit cleanly into any of them, and he watched her frustration mount. I can't accept these anymore, she nodded at the plate. I don't take charity. It is charity. Anonymous, creepy charity from a stranger who knows my schedule and my problems, and apparently has nothing better to do than cook for the sad waitress. Her eyes were bright now, tears she was too stubborn to shed. I've got enough people pitying me. I don't need another one. She turned for the door, and Isidor spoke before he could think better of it. There's no pity in what I feel for you. Brenna stopped, didn't turn around, but her hand hesitated on the door handle. Then what is it? 100 ways to answer that question, and all of them were either too much or not enough. He settled for the only truth he could offer without terrifying her. Admiration. Respect. The kind of regard you can't help but feel when you watch someone carry more than they should with more grace than anyone has a right to expect. She did turn then, and her expression was complicated. Suspicious but wanting to believe, angry but also something softer underneath. You don't know anything about grace. You don't know what my life is like. You're right. I only see what you show. But what you show is... He stopped, regrouped. I'll stop. If that's what you want, I'll disappear and you'll never see these meals again. But let me do one more thing first. What? The diner's being threatened by a buyout. A chain called Harvest Holdings has been pressuring the current owner to sell. If that happens, they'll fire everyone who makes more than minimum wage and cut the night shifts entirely. You'll lose both your jobs. He watched her face go pale. I can stop it. I can make sure Harvest backs off permanently. Let me do that, and then I'll leave you alone. How would you even... She shook her head sharply. No. I'm not trading favors. I'm not getting into debt with some mysterious rich guy who will show up later expecting... I expect nothing. I want nothing from you. The lie tasted bitter, but it was close enough to truth. He wanted everything, her time, her trust, her laughter, the right to stand beside her and carry some of the weight she bore alone, but he'd settle for her safety. Consider it a gift with no strings attached. You'll never hear from me again. Brenna studied him with those sharp green eyes, and he felt assessed in a way he hadn't experienced in centuries. Weighed and measured by someone with no idea of his power or status, judged purely on the merit of his words and actions. Who are you? She asked again, but differently this time. Not demanding, but genuinely curious. Someone who sees you, Isidor said simply. Someone who thinks you deserve more than the world has given you. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, so softly he almost missed it. The chicken marsala smells really good. It's still warm. She wrapped her arms around herself, and he recognized the gesture now. Defense mechanism, trying to hold herself together through sheer stubbornness. If I accept it, will you answer one question honestly? Yes. Why me? Of all the people struggling in this city, why am I the one who gets mysterious home-cooked meals? Because you smiled at an elderly customer who came in every Tuesday and ordered coffee he nursed for 3 hours, never once making him feel unwelcome. Because you slipped your own tips into the charity jar when you thought no one was looking. Because you have a brother dying in a hospital bed and you still find it in yourself to be kind to strangers who don't deserve it. Because when I look at you, I remember what it felt like to be human. And I've been dead inside for so long, I'd forgotten that was something worth wanting. Because you remind me of someone I used to know, he lied. Someone I should have helped when I had the chance. It wasn't what she wanted to hear. He could see the disappointment flicker across her face, but it was safer than the truth, and safety was all he could offer her right now. Okay. She moved to the counter, picked up the plate, and met his eyes one more time. Thank you. For the meals. For noticing. And for, she gestured vaguely. For caring, I guess, even if it is weird and borderline stalkerish. You're welcome. But I still need your name. If you're going to save the diner, I should at least know who's doing it. He should have prepared a false name, should have a dozen aliases ready. Instead, he gave her the truth, or part of it. Isidor. Isidor. She tested the name, and he liked the way it sounded in her voice. Old-fashioned and strange, but she didn't question it. I'm Brenna. I know. Right, of course you do. Creepy stalker who knows my schedule. But she was almost smiling when she said it, some of the anger draining into exhaustion and reluctant amusement. I need to get back to work. Brenna? She paused at the door, looking back. The diner will be fine, I promise. She nodded once, then disappeared into the front of house, taking all the warmth in the room with her. Isidor stood alone in the break room and realized he'd just made himself a promise he'd have to keep publicly. No more anonymous help, no more hiding behind shell companies and unsigned meals. Cassian was right. The middle ground had just collapsed. The council chamber was carved from stone that predated modern architecture by centuries, hidden 3 levels below a downtown building Isidor owned through a network of holding companies. Torches burned in sconces along the walls despite the presence of electric lighting tradition mattered in vampire society, and some traditions were worth keeping. 12 vampires sat at the curved table, representing the major families of the Eastern Territories. Each one commanded their own resources, their own people, their own power base. Together, they advised the king. Separately, they schemed against each other with the casual ruthlessness of predators who'd forgotten what it meant to be prey. Isidor took his place at the head of the table and waited for the room to settle. He'd called this meeting, which was unusual enough to guarantee attendance. The last time he'd convened the council outside the regular schedule, he'd been declaring war on the Southern Territories. The time before that, he'd been executing a traitor. Thank you for coming on short notice. His voice carried easily in the acoustics of the chamber. I have several items to discuss, but first a declaration. As of yesterday, I have taken direct control of a property in the warehouse district, a restaurant called Nora's Diner. It is under my personal protection, along with everyone who works there. Anyone who threatens the property or its people will answer to me directly. Silence. Then Victor leaned forward, his white hair falling around his face like a shroud. He was one of the oldest vampires in the region, turned during the Renaissance, and he'd never bothered to hide his ambition. A diner, my lord? Forgive me, but your usual acquisitions tend toward more profitable ventures. My reasons are my own, of course. But when our king makes unusual decisions, the council worries. We worry about judgment, about priorities, about whether personal interests might be clouding strategic thinking. Victor's tone was respectful, but barely. We've heard rumors of a human girl, a waitress. Some of us wonder if this declaration is connected. It is. The admission sent ripples through the room. Isidor watched his council exchange glances, saw alliances shift in real time as they processed this confirmation. He'd kept his interest in Brenna quiet enough that only rumors had circulated. Now he was making it explicit, and that changed everything. My lord, Elena, one of his more diplomatic counselors, spoke carefully. We all understand the appeal of humans, the pull of their warmth, their mortality, their fascinating fragility. Many of us maintain human companions, but declaring one under your personal protection, making public your interest, this creates complications. Such as enemies who will see her as a weakness to exploit, such as humans who might notice our interest and start asking questions, such as the possibility that you might be distracted from your duties to the realm. She spread her hands. We don't question your right to whatever relationship you choose. We question the wisdom of making it a public matter. Isidor had expected this argument, had prepared for it. My interest in Brenna Murphy will not interfere with my duties. The diner acquisition is one property among hundreds. The protection is a formality that costs us nothing. As for enemies, let them come. Anyone foolish enough to threaten what's mine can serve as an example to the others. And when she ages? Victor asked softly. When she dies, as humans do, will you be similarly invested in the next mortal who catches your eye? Or is this one special? The question was barbed. They all knew the answer, and they all knew what it meant. She's special. No point in denying it now. But my commitment to this realm hasn't wavered in 3 centuries. One human girl doesn't change that. Aldrich said something similar about his human. Victor leaned back, apparently satisfied he'd made his point. We all remember how that ended. Aldrich tried to force an unauthorized turning and sparked a civil war. I'm not turning Brenna. I'm not even pursuing her, not really. I'm simply ensuring she's safe and cared for while I admire her from a respectful distance. That's not what this looks like. Cassian spoke up, his voice cutting through the murmurs. To the court, to the realm, to anyone watching this, looks like a vampire king falling for a mortal. Which means she becomes a target. Which means you'll have to protect her more actively. Which means you'll be exactly as distracted as we fear. He wasn't wrong. Isidor had run the same calculations himself 100 times, and they always came out the same way. The moment he'd decided to help Brenna, he'd started down a path that led inevitably to this confrontation, and every step he'd taken since had only cemented his course. Then I'll be distracted. He let his power fill his voice, ancient and absolute, the weight of centuries pressing down on the room. But I will also still be king. I will still protect this realm. I will still fulfill every duty and obligation I have taken on. And if any of you truly believe that one human girl has the power to undo 300 years of my rule, then perhaps you should challenge me directly rather than hiding behind concerns about my judgment. No one moved. No one spoke. Power dynamics in vampire society were brutally simple. The strong ruled, the weak obeyed, and anyone who forgot that distinction didn't survive long enough to regret it. Finally, Elena inclined her head. We meant no disrespect, my lord. We simply wanted our concerns noted. They're noted. Dismissed. He waved a hand. Now, on to actual business. The treaty with the Northern Territories comes up for renewal next month. The meeting continued for another 2 hours, covering territory disputes and blood supply chains and the 1,000 small details that kept vampire society functioning in a human-dominated world. But Isidor's mind kept drifting back to the diner, to Brenna, to the way she'd looked at him with suspicion and gratitude and reluctant curiosity all tangled together. She didn't know what he was, didn't know that the man offering to save her workplace was a centuries-old predator who ruled the night, didn't know that his interest in her had already made her a piece on a political game board she couldn't even see, and he had no idea how to tell her any of it without losing her forever. Brenna found the envelope taped to her locker 3 days later, after a shift that had been mercifully short by her standards only 12 hours instead of the usual 16. Inside was a cashier's check for $20,000, made out to Mercy General Hospital with a note in elegant handwriting. For Ethan's care. No debt, no obligation, no strings. You don't have to carry everything alone. She stared at it until the numbers blurred, her hands shaking so badly she had to sit down on the break room floor before her knees gave out. $20,000. Enough to cover 3 months of treatment, maybe 4 if she was careful. Enough to give Ethan a real chance instead of just barely keeping his head above water. Enough to let her breathe for the first time in 18 months. And she couldn't accept it. Could she? Brenna pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes, trying to think through the exhaustion that made every thought feel like wading through mud. This was too much. Way too much. Home-cooked meals were one thing weird but harmless, easy enough to rationalize as an eccentric gesture from someone with more time than sense, but this was life-changing money, and there was no way to pretend it didn't come with expectations, except the note said no strings. And something about the way Isidor had looked at her in this room 4 nights ago made her want to believe him. She'd spent those 4 nights thinking about him more than she wanted to admit. The careful way he'd held himself, like he was afraid of taking up too much space. The roughness in his voice when he'd said there was no pity in what he felt for her. The fact that he'd known details about her life no one else had bothered to notice. Not her coworkers, not the handful of friends she'd lost touch with, not even the distant relatives who sent occasional thoughts and prayers texts instead of actual help. He saw her, Really saw her, not just the tired waitress taking their order or the girl trying to stay upbeat at her brother's bedside. And that was dangerous in ways she couldn't fully articulate because being invisible had been her protection. If no one looked too closely, no one would see how close she was to breaking. But he'd looked. He'd seen. And instead of turning away, he'd decided to help. The question was why. Brenna stood up, legs still shaky, and pulled out her phone. Marco had mentioned that the mysterious new owner of the diner had come by yesterday for a tour. She'd missed it, being at the hospital, but he'd described the man as fancy, polite, weirdly interested in the kitchen equipment. She had a feeling she knew who that was. It took her 20 minutes and some creative use of the diner's office computer to find a business address, Nightwell Holdings, located in one of the expensive downtown high-rises where she'd never have reason to go. Another 10 minutes to confirm that Nightwell Holdings had recently acquired several properties in the area, including Nora's diner. Isidor hadn't been lying about protecting her job. He'd bought the whole building. Brenna looked down at the check in her hand, then at the address on her phone screen. This was insane. She should just rip up the check, forget the mysterious rich guy with his home-cooked meals and his unsettling ability to anticipate her needs, go back to surviving one shift at a time like she'd been doing for the past year and a half. Except Ethan didn't have time for her to keep surviving. He needed her to actually solve problems, and this check was a solution she couldn't afford to refuse out of pure stubbornness. She grabbed her jacket and headed for the door before she could talk herself out of it. The building that housed Nightwell Holdings was the kind of place that made her hyper-aware of her stained uniform and worn shoes. All glass and steel and marble, with a lobby that echoed when she walked, and security guards who looked at her like they were trying to decide if she was lost or trespassing. "I'm here to see Isidor Nightwell." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "I don't have an appointment, but tell him Brenna Murphy is here. He'll know who I am." The guard's expression suggested he doubted that very much, but he made the call. Then his eyebrows climbed toward his hairline, and suddenly she was being escorted to a private elevator that required a key card to operate. The ride up was long enough for her to second-guess this decision 17 times. What was she doing? What was she going to say? "Thank you for the absurdly generous check. Also, who are you and why are you doing this? Also, I'm terrified and grateful in equal measure, and I don't know how to handle either emotion." The elevator opened onto a floor that was more penthouse than office space. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of the city that probably cost more than she'd make in a lifetime. The furniture was minimalist and expensive. Everything was decorated in shades of black and silver and deep crimson, elegant in a way that felt slightly out of time, like whoever designed it was thinking of older aesthetics. Isidor stood by the windows, backlit by the city lights, and turned as she entered. He looked different here, more in his element, maybe. He wore dark slacks and a black shirt that probably cost more than her rent, his white hair pulled back, his pale skin almost luminous in the low lighting. Handsome in a way that was almost too perfect, like a statue come to life. Dangerous, something whispered in the back of her mind, but she'd known that from the start. "Brenna." He said her name like it mattered. "I didn't expect to see you again so soon. You left me $20,000. She held up the check. "That seems like the kind of thing that warrants a conversation. You're not supposed to know it was from me. Who else would it be? Unless you think I have multiple mysterious benefactors stalking my schedule and leaving me ridiculous amounts of money." A smile ghosted across his face, brief but genuine. "Fair point. I can't accept this." She walked forward, set the check on the nearest table. "It's too much. It's way, way too much. It's enough to help your brother. That makes it exactly the right amount. But why would you—" She stopped, regrouped. "I don't understand what you want from me. And don't say nothing because people don't just give away this kind of money for nothing." Isidor was quiet for a moment, and she watched something complicated move across his expression. Calculation, maybe. Or conflict. "What if I said I want to know you better? Then I'd say there are cheaper ways to ask someone out." "I'm not asking you out. I'm asking." He stopped, looking frustrated with himself. "I'm asking for the chance to be in your life, even peripherally. To help when I can. To see you occasionally. That's all." "Why?" "Because you matter to me." The words came out raw, unguarded. "I know that doesn't make sense. I know we've spoken twice and you have no reason to trust me, but you matter to me, and I want to make your life easier in whatever way I can." Brenna stared at him, trying to process that, looking for the angle, the catch, the moment where this turned into something she'd regret. But all she saw was sincerity, uncomfortable and exposed from a man who clearly wasn't used to revealing himself. "Take the check," he continued, quieter now. "Use it for Ethan. Let me help with that much at least. If afterward you never want to see me again, I'll respect that. But please don't let pride stop you from giving your brother the care he needs." It was a low blow, and they both knew it, because he was right. Ethan needed this more than she needed to maintain her dignity. "If I take this," she said slowly, "I want something in return. Anything. Honesty. Real honesty. Who are you, Isidor? Because this—" She gestured at the penthouse, at the expensive view, at him standing there like some kind of Gothic prince. "This isn't normal. You're not normal. And I need to know what I'm getting into." The silence stretched long enough that she thought he might refuse. Then he gestured to a pair of chairs by the window. "Sit, please. This conversation's going to take a while." She sat, and he took the chair across from her, close enough that she could see the odd quality of his eyes, pale gray, almost colorless, with a depth that suggested he was looking at her from a great distance, even though he was right there. "I'm not human," he said simply. "I'm a vampire. I've been a vampire for 300 years, give or take a decade. I rule the vampire population in this region, which makes me something like a king, though the politics are more complicated than that term suggests. I own significant property, including this building and the diner where you work. And I've been watching you for 4 months because from the moment I first saw you, I haven't been able to stop thinking about you." Brenna opened her mouth, closed it, tried to find words and came up empty. A vampire. He just told her he was a vampire. She should laugh. Should think he was insane, or messing with her, or engaging in some elaborate rich person roleplay. Should stand up and walk out and block his number and pretend this conversation never happened. Instead, she found herself studying him more closely. The too pale skin. The white hair that didn't match his apparent age. The way he held perfectly still when he wasn't actively moving, like he forgot to mimic human fidgeting. The fact that she'd never seen him during the day. "Prove it," she heard herself say. Isidor's expression flickered with something like relief. "You believe me?" "I don't know what I believe, but prove it. If you're telling the truth, show me." He stood slowly, giving her time to change her mind. When she didn't, he extended his hand, and she watched his fingernails elongate into claws that gleamed like polished bone. His eyes bled from gray to crimson, and when he smiled, his canines had extended into fangs that belonged in nightmares. Brenna's heart kicked into overdrive, but she didn't run. Couldn't run, maybe, frozen in place by the visceral proof that everything she'd thought she knew about reality was wrong. Then he blinked, and he was just a man again. Beautiful and pale and perfectly human-looking, except now she knew what lurked underneath. "I would never hurt you." His voice was urgent, like he needed her to understand that above all else. "I know what I am, what I'm capable of, but I would never hurt you. You're safe with me. I swear it. You're a vampire." The words felt surreal in her mouth. Actual fangs and drinking blood and all of that? "Yes. And you're a king? Of sorts. And you've been watching me because—" She trailed off, waiting for him to fill in the blank. "Because you're extraordinary." He said it simply, like it was obvious. "Because I've lived for 3 centuries, and I've never met anyone who carried herself the way you do. Because you're kind in a world that gives you every reason not to be, and strong in ways that have nothing to do with physical power. And when I look at you, I remember what it felt like to be human enough to hope for something better." Brenna swallowed hard against the sudden tightness in her throat. That's a lot to put on someone you've never had a real conversation with. "I know. I'm sorry. You didn't ask for any of this, the attention, the meals, the money, the revelation that vampires exist, and one of them has developed an extremely inconvenient obsession with you." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so humanly frustrated it made him seem more real, not less. "I should have stayed away. It would have been better for both of us if I'd just remained a stranger who helped anonymously. But I'm not good at denying myself things I want, and I wanted— What? What do you want? To sit across a table from you and share a meal. To hear you laugh when you're not forcing it for a customer. To take some of the weight off your shoulders and watch you remember what it's like to breathe. He met her eyes, and the intensity there stole her breath. To court you, properly, if you'd let me. Court me, she almost laughed at the old-fashioned phrasing. You want to date me? I want whatever you're comfortable with. Coffee if that's all you can manage. Continued anonymous meals if you prefer distance. Nothing if that's what you need. But yes, ideally, I want to court you, to spend time with you, to give you the kind of attention you deserve from someone who sees exactly how remarkable you are. This was insane. All of it was completely insane. She should be running, screaming, calling someone though. Who did you call when you discovered vampires were real and one of them was interested in you romantically? But underneath the fear and shock and disbelief, something else was stirring. Curiosity, interest, the dangerous whisper of what if. Because when had anyone ever seen her the way Isidor claimed to? When had anyone cared enough to learn her schedule, to cook for her, to notice she was drowning and throw her a lifeline without asking for anything in return? Never. The answer was never. I need time, she said finally, to process this, to figure out what I think, she gestured vaguely, to adjust to the idea that vampires exist and I've apparently caught the attention of their king. Of course. Take all the time you need. He reached past her, picked up the check, and held it out. But take this. Please. Whatever you decide about me, Ethan needs this. She took it, fingers brushing his, and was startled by the coolness of his skin. Dead, she thought, and suppressed a shiver. He's been dead for 300 years, but he didn't feel dead when he looked at her like that. Thank you, she said softly. For this. For being honest. For not trying to compel me or manipulate me or whatever vampires do to humans. Some of us do that, he admitted. I could if I wanted, but I don't want your affection because I've twisted your mind into giving it. I want it freely offered or not at all. That's surprisingly ethical for a supernatural predator. I've had 3 centuries to develop a moral code. It's a work in progress, but I try. She found herself smiling despite everything. Then reality crashed back in, and she stood abruptly. I should go. I need to get to the hospital, and it's a lot. I'll have someone drive you. I can take the bus. Brenna. He stood too, maintaining that careful distance. Let me do this much. Please. She was too tired to argue, and the thought of not having to stand on a crowded bus for 40 minutes sounded like heaven. Okay? Yes, thank you. The car was a sleek black sedan that probably cost more than most people's houses, and the driver was professional and silent the whole way to Mercy General. Brenna spent the ride staring out the window, the check folded carefully in her jacket pocket, her mind spinning in circles trying to make sense of everything. Vampires were real. Isidor was a vampire. A vampire king was interested in her, and she was considering saying yes. God help her, she was actually considering it. Ethan was awake when she arrived, which was rare enough these days to make her heart lift. He'd lost weight over the past months, his 17-year-old face gaunt and tired, but he managed to smile when she came in. Hey, Bren. His voice was hoarse from the oxygen tube. You look like you've seen a ghost. Something like that. She dropped into the visitor's chair, suddenly overwhelmed with the need to tell someone, anyone, about what had just happened. But what could she say? Your sister met a vampire who wants to date her and also paid for your treatment? That sounded insane even in her own head. Instead, she pulled out the check and watched his eyes go wide. Holy shit, Brenna. Where did you— A donor. Someone who wanted to help. Not quite a lie, but not quite the truth either. It's enough to cover your treatment for the next few months, maybe longer. Ethan stared at the check, then at her, then back at the check. This is real? This is actually happening? It's real. But who would just— He stopped, something shifting in his expression. It's that guy, isn't it? The one you didn't want to talk about. She'd mentioned Isidor exactly once, in passing, and Ethan had immediately picked up on the fact that there was a story there. He'd always been too perceptive for his own good. Yeah, she admitted. It's him. Is he, like, a millionaire or something? Or something. Bren. Ethan's voice was serious now, worried in the way only little brothers could be when they suspected their sisters were in over their heads. Is this safe? You're not getting involved in anything dangerous, are you? The question was so absurd given what she'd just learned that she had to suppress a slightly hysterical laugh. Dangerous didn't even begin to cover it. I don't think so, she said carefully. I think he's just someone who wants to help, someone who has the resources to make a difference and decided to use them. And he's not expecting anything in return? He says he's not. People always expect something, Brenna. I know, but I think... She paused, trying to find words for the strange certainty she felt. I think he might be different. Or at least, I want to find out if he is. Ethan studied her with eyes that were too old for his age, made ancient by months of hospitals and pain and the knowledge of his own mortality. You like him. I don't even know him. But you want to. Did she? Yeah. Yeah, she really did. Despite the insanity, despite the fear, despite every logical reason to run in the opposite direction, she wanted to know Isidor. Wanted to understand what it meant to be seen by someone who'd lived for 300 years. Wanted to find out if the way he looked at her was as real as it felt. Maybe, she admitted. Then be careful. But also, Ethan reached out, squeezed her hand with what little strength he had. Don't be so careful you miss something good. You deserve something good, Bren. You deserve someone who sees how amazing you are. Tears pricked her eyes, quick and hot. When did you get so wise? When my big sister spent the last year and a half sacrificing everything for me. I pay attention. He smiled, tired but genuine. Now go home. Get some sleep. And maybe text your mysterious benefactor and tell him thanks. She did text him, after she'd stumbled back to her tiny apartment and collapsed on the couch, still wearing her uniform. Just 2 words. Thank you. His response came almost immediately. You're welcome. Then, after a pause, may I see you again? Brenna stared at her phone, thumb hovering over the keyboard. This was the moment to draw a line, to establish boundaries, to protect herself from the inevitable heartbreak of getting involved with someone so far outside her world. Instead, she typed, Coffee tomorrow? I have the morning free. The response was instant. I'll pick you up at 10. Sleep well, Brenna. She fell asleep with her phone still in her hand and dreamed of crimson eyes and pale skin and a voice that said she mattered. The coffee shop Isidor chose was small and quiet, tucked away in a neighborhood Brenna rarely visited. She arrived on time to find him already there, seated at a corner table with 2 cups in front of him. I didn't know what you liked, he said as she sat down, so I got you a cappuccino, but I can order something else if you prefer. Cappuccino's perfect. She wrapped her hands around the warm cup, grateful for something to do with her nervous energy. Do you drink coffee? Can you drink coffee? I can. It doesn't do anything for me nutritionally, but I remember enjoying the taste when I was human. He took a sip of his own cup black, no sugar, and she found herself fascinated by the gesture. Such a normal human thing for a creature who was neither. So? She met his eyes across the table. Vampire King. That's a real thing. Unfortunately, yes. The politics are exhausting, and the bureaucracy somehow manages to be worse than human government, which I didn't think was possible. She laughed, surprised into it. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? I don't know. More dramatic? More mysterious and brooding? You seem almost normal. I've had 3 centuries to practice seeming normal. It's a survival skill. His expression turned more serious. But I'm not normal, Brenna. I want to be clear about that. I'm a predator. I've killed people. I've made decisions that would horrify you if you knew the details. The fact that I'm capable of sitting here having coffee doesn't change what I am underneath. Why are you telling me this? Most people would try to make themselves look better, not worse. Because you deserve honesty. And because if we're going to try this, whatever this is, I need you to understand exactly what you're agreeing to. He leaned forward slightly. I'm dangerous, Brenna. Not to you, never to you, but to people who might come after you because of me. My world is complicated and often violent, and being connected to me will make your life more complicated too. Is this your way of talking me out of seeing you? No, This is my way of making sure you can make an informed choice." Brenna took a long sip of her cappuccino, thinking. Everything he said made sense. Everything he said should terrify her into running. And yet, "You've been taking care of me for months," she said slowly. "The meals, the diner, the money for Ethan. You've been making my life less complicated, not more. So maybe your world is dangerous, but you've been nothing but kind to me. That has to count for something. It counts for the fact that I'm selfish enough to want you safe and happy so I can keep seeing you. I'll take selfish kindness over altruistic indifference any day." Isidor's expression softened into something that made her chest tight. "You're determined to think well of me. You're determined to make me think badly of you. I guess we're both stubborn. I noticed that about you. The stubbornness." He was almost smiling now. "You refused the first 3 meals I left. Did you know that? Just threw them away. I had to start making things so good you couldn't resist. That shepherd's pie was really unfair. Who makes shepherd's pie that good? Someone who is very motivated to get you to eat." They fell into easier conversation after that, trading details about themselves. Brenna talked about Ethan, about their childhood before their parents died, about the slow process of watching her brother get sick, while insurance companies invented new ways to deny coverage. Isidor talked about his turning, about the vampire who'd made him without asking. It was different then, more brutal, less regulated, and about the centuries that followed as he built power and influence and eventually carved out a territory of his own. "Do you miss it?" she asked. "Being human?" "Sometimes. I miss sunlight. I miss the simplicity of human concerns. You worry about money and time and relationships, which are real problems but fundamentally solvable. Vampire problems tend to be more along the lines of ancient enemies plotting assassination and political schemes that span decades." He paused. "But mostly I miss the ability to grow. Humans change constantly, learning and adapting and becoming new versions of themselves. Vampires are static. We are who we are, frozen at the moment of turning, and nothing really changes after that. You seem like you've changed. You learned to cook." I relearned something I'd forgotten. It's not quite the same. "It counts?" she insisted. "You saw someone who needed something and learned a new skill to help them. That's growth." He looked at her like she'd said something profound instead of obvious. "You're determined to see the best in me. Someone has to balance out your determination to see the worst in yourself." The smile he gave her was real and warm and entirely human, and Brenna felt something shift in her chest. "Dangerous," that voice whispered again, "but maybe the good kind of dangerous." They talked until her alarm went off, reminding her she had a shift starting in an hour. Isidor walked her to the curb, where his driver was already waiting. "Can I see you again?" he asked. "You're asking permission now? You've been stalking me for months." "Observing from a respectful distance," he corrected. "There's a difference." "Is there, though?" "Probably not." He looked almost embarrassed, which was absurdly endearing for a centuries-old vampire king. "But I'd like to do this properly going forward. Dates, real ones, where we both agree to spend time together." "Okay." The word came easier than she expected. "Yes, I'd like that." "Dinner tomorrow? I know a place that's—" "Let me cook for you," she interrupted. "You've been feeding me for months. It's my turn." "You don't have to. I want to. Come to my apartment tomorrow at 8. I'll make something that definitely won't be as good as your shepherd's pie, but hopefully won't poison you either." "Brenna, I'm technically dead. Poison isn't really a concern." "Then you'll have no excuse not to eat whatever I make." He laughed, and the sound was so genuine and surprised that she wanted to make him do it again. 8 o'clock. I'll be there." She gave him her address, accepted a ride to the diner, and spent her entire shift in a daze that had Marco asking if she was feeling all right. She wasn't all right. She was having coffee with a vampire and agreeing to dinner dates and thinking about what it might mean to date someone who'd been alive for 300 years. She was completely insane. And for the first time in 18 months, she was also happy. The attack came 2 days before their dinner date, sudden and vicious and exactly what Cassian had warned him about. Isidor was in a meeting when the call came through. Victor had moved against Brenna, sending his people to the diner during her shift. Not to kill her, which would have been a declaration of war, but to scare her. To send a message that the king's interest made her a liability. He left the meeting without a word, moving faster than human eyes could track, and reached the diner in minutes. The sight that greeted him made something ancient and terrible unfurl in his chest. Brenna was pressed against the back wall, 3 vampires surrounding her. Customers were gone, compelled to forget and leave. The other staff were unconscious, sprawled behind the counter, and Brenna brave, stubborn, impossible. Brenna was holding a kitchen knife and looking like she was actually considering fighting creatures who could tear her apart without effort. "Touch her, and I'll end your entire bloodline." Isidor's voice dropped into registers that made the building shake. "Step back, now." The 3 vampires froze, recognition and fear flooding their expressions. They stepped back as one, heads lowering in submission. "My lord, we meant no... You meant to frighten what's mine, to send a message to me through her. Do you know what message I'm receiving?" He let his power fill the space, ancient and absolute and utterly merciless. "That Victor has forgotten who rules here, that some of my subjects need a reminder about the cost of disobedience. We were following orders. Then Victor can join you in answering for those orders. Get out. Tell him I'm coming for him tonight. Tell him to gather whatever allies he thinks can protect him. Tell him it won't be enough." They fled, and then it was just Isidor and Brenna in the empty diner, and she was shaking so hard the knife rattled in her grip. "Hey," he moved slowly, carefully, telegraphing every motion. "It's okay. You're safe. They're gone." "They were going to..." Her voice broke. "They said I was a message, that I needed to learn what happens to humans who distract vampire kings." "I know. I'm so sorry. This is my fault." He gently took the knife from her, set it aside, and then did something he'd never done before, pulled her into his arms without asking permission first. "I should have protected you better. I should have anticipated this." She collapsed against him, and he felt her heart racing, her breath coming in short gasps. Shock, he recognized. She was going into shock. "The others," she managed, "Marco and Sarah, and they're fine, just compelled to sleep. They won't remember any of this." He carefully maneuvered her toward a chair, supporting her weight. "Sit. Put your head down. Breathe slowly." "Vampires are real." She said it like she was still trying to convince herself. "They came into the diner and they threatened me, and vampires are real." "I know. I'm sorry. I know this is... You need to go." She looked up at him, eyes wide and frightened. "You need to go deal with Victor before he sends more people, before someone gets hurt." "I'm not leaving you like this." "I'm fine. She took a shaky breath. "I'm not fine, but I will be. And you need to go be a king and handle this before it gets worse. Right?" She was right. Every moment he delayed was a moment Victor had to fortify his position, gather supporters, prepare for the confrontation. But leaving her felt impossible, every instinct screaming at him to stay and guard and keep her close. "Cassian will stay with you," he compromised. His lieutenant materialized from the shadows, always close when needed. "He'll make sure you get home safely. And I'll come to you as soon as this is finished, okay?" Brenna nodded, still pale but steadying. "Be careful. I'm 300 years old and very hard to kill. Still, be careful." The concern in her voice nearly undid him. He cupped her face carefully, mindful of his strength, and met her eyes. "I will end this tonight. Victor and anyone who sided with him will face consequences. And then I'm going to make sure everyone in this territory understands that you are under my protection, and anyone who threatens you threatens me directly. That's going to make me a target. You were already a target the moment I looked at you twice. At least now the rules will be clear." He pressed his forehead to hers briefly, breathing in her scent, steadying himself. "I'll see you soon." Then he was gone, moving through the night with the speed and purpose of a predator who'd been challenged in his own territory. Victor's mansion was old money and older blood, a state on the outskirts of the city where humans rarely ventured. Isidor arrived to find it fortified guards at every entrance, protective wards humming along the property line, vampires positioned on the roof and in the gardens. Victor had been expecting him. Good. Isidor walked through the front door without slowing, and the guards scrambled to get out of his way. The wards sparked against his skin but didn't stop him. He was too old, too powerful, and too angry to be deterred by basic defenses. He found Victor in the main hall, surrounded by a dozen vampires who'd apparently decided to make this a formal challenge. Elena was there, looking conflicted. Others from the council, their expressions ranging from supportive to carefully neutral. "My lord." Victor inclined his head, the gesture just respectful enough to avoid being an open insult. "I wondered when you'd arrive. You sent vampires to threaten a human under my protection, in my territory, during a time of peace." Isidor's voice was cold and precise. "Explain why I shouldn't execute you right now." "I sent a message, a necessary reminder that your obsession with one mortal is making you weak, distracted, vulnerable. The court needed to see how easily she could be reached, how little protection you've actually provided. She's alive, which means my protection held. Your people ran the moment I arrived, which means they knew exactly how much they were risking. The only thing you've proven tonight is your own arrogance and stupidity. The old families agree with me." Victor gestured to the assembled vampires. "Your interest in this human is unseemly. It makes us look weak. It suggests that our king values one mortal girl over the security of his realm. The old families can voice their concerns in council, like civilized beings, rather than attacking innocents to make a point." Isidor looked around the room, meeting eyes, watching vampires drop their gazes. "But since we're here, let's make this clear. Brenna Murphy is mine. Anyone who touches her answers to me. Anyone who threatens her answers to me. Anyone who even looks at her wrong will discover exactly how weak and distracted I'm not. You can't possibly enforce that, not against the entire court. Try me." Isidor let his power unfurl, filling the space, pressing down on every vampire in the room. 3 centuries of accumulated strength, ancient and absolute, the weight of a king who'd built his territory through blood and will, and the kind of violence most of them had only heard about in stories. "I've killed challengers before, Victor. I've ended bloodlines. I've razed estates and scattered families to the wind. The fact that I've been civil for the past century doesn't mean I've forgotten how to be otherwise." The silence was profound. Even Victor looked uncertain now, perhaps realizing he'd miscalculated badly. "Here's what's going to happen," Isidor continued, voice dropping into something soft and infinitely more dangerous. "You're going to formally apologize to Brenna, in person, in front of witnesses, so everyone understands that you've acknowledged your error. Then you're going to step down from the council, because I no longer trust your judgment. And then you're going to spend the next decade being extremely grateful that I'm letting you keep your life, despite the fact that you attacked something precious to me. You can't remove me from the council without a vote. I'm not removing you. You're resigning. Unless you prefer I call a formal challenge right here, right now, and we settle this the old way?" Isidor smiled, all fangs and old violence. "I haven't had a proper fight in decades. It might be refreshing." Victor paled, actually paled, despite already being corpse white, and inclined his head in defeat. "I'll resign." "Good. Elena, you're interim council head until we hold elections. Anyone else have concerns about my relationship with Brenna Murphy?" He looked around the room, waiting. "No? Excellent. Then we're done here." He left the same way he'd arrived, through the front door at a walk, projecting confidence and power and the absolute certainty that he'd won. Behind him, he could feel the court processing what had just happened, adjusting to the new reality where their king had claimed a human and would burn down anyone who objected. Let them adjust. He had somewhere more important to be. Brenna's apartment was small and worn, the kind of place people lived when they were spending everything they had on someone else's medical bills. But she'd tried to make it nice curtains on the windows, plants on the sill, photos of her and Ethan on the walls. She opened the door, still pale but steadier, and stepped back to let him in. "It's done," he said simply. "Victor has been handled. You're safe." "What does handled mean?" "It means he's no longer a threat, and everyone in my territory now understands that hurting you is the fastest way to end their existence." He watched her process that, looking for fear or disgust or any sign that she was rethinking this entire situation. Instead, she just looked tired. "You come in, I made dinner anyway." The table was set for 2, and something that smelled amazing was staying warm in the oven. She served it without ceremony, pasta and cream sauce with chicken and vegetables, simple but perfect, the kind of meal you made when you needed comfort. They ate in silence for a while, the weight of the evening settling between them. "I was scared," Brenna said finally, really scared, but also angry, because I was working and those vampires just decided my life didn't matter as much as making a point to you. And that's, she stopped, regrouped. That's what my entire life has been like. People making decisions about me without asking, dismissing me because I'm not important enough to consider. And I'm tired of it. You're important. The words came out fiercer than he intended. You're the most important thing in my world right now, and anyone who says otherwise can argue with me directly. I'm a waitress with a dying brother and student loans I'll never pay off. I'm not important in any real sense. You're everything. He reached across the table, palm up, offering. You're brave and kind and strong in ways most people couldn't even comprehend. You matter, Brenna. Not because of what you do or who you know, but because of who you are. And I need you to believe that. She looked at his hand for a long moment, and he could see her warring with herself, wanting to believe, afraid to trust it. Finally, she placed her hand in his, and the warmth of her skin against his cool palm felt like a promise. I'm still scared, she admitted, of your world, of the danger, of what it means to be with someone who's lived for 300 years. But I'm also, she met his eyes, I'm also tired of being alone. And you see me. Really see me, and that's worth being scared for. Isidor stood, drawing her up with him, and very carefully pulled her close. This time she came willingly, wrapping her arms around him, burying her face against his chest. He held her like she was precious because she was, because in 3 centuries of existence he'd never felt anything as profound as the way her heartbeat synced with the rhythm of his own stillness. I'm going to protect you, he said quietly. I'm going to take care of you. And I'm going to spend however long you'll give me proving that you matter more than anything else in my world. That's a lot of pressure for someone you've known for less than a week. I've known you for 4 months. I've just been too much of a coward to introduce myself properly. She laughed, muffled against his shirt, and he felt the tension drain from her body. They stood there for a long time, just holding each other, and Isidor marveled at the simple miracle of it. 300 years of existence, and he'd never understood what poets meant when they wrote about love until this moment. Stay tonight? Brenna asked. Just stay. I don't want to be alone. I'll stay as long as you want. They moved to the couch, and she curled against him while he wrapped an arm around her shoulders. At some point she fell asleep, exhausted by fear and adrenaline and the sheer emotional weight of the day. Isidor held her and watched the sky lighten toward dawn through her window and made silent promises to every power that might be listening that he would never let her be hurt again. The months that followed were simultaneously the best and strangest of Brenna's life. Dating a vampire king, it turned out, came with complications she'd never imagined. There were the logistics. He could only see her after sunset, which meant their time together was limited by her work schedule and his need to sleep during daylight hours. There were the cultural differences he'd grown up in the 1600s, and sometimes said things that reminded her just how old he really was. There were the security concerns. Cassian or another guard was always nearby now, shadowing her movements, which felt invasive, until she remembered what had happened at the diner. But there were also moments of startling normalcy. Isidor came to dinner twice a week, and they took turns cooking. He introduced her to his favorite books, some of them first editions that made her afraid to touch them. She introduced him to television and watched him become inexplicably invested in a baking competition show. They talked for hours about everything and nothing: her childhood, his turning, philosophy and politics, and the strange overlap between vampire society and human bureaucracy. He met Ethan, which had been terrifying until her brother had looked at Isidor and said, "So you're the vampire, huh? Brenna said you were tall." Apparently her brother took supernatural revelations better than she did. "He's good for you," Ethan told her later, during one of his better days when the medications were working and the pain was manageable. "I've never seen you this happy." "I'm still figuring out how to be happy," she admitted. "It's weird." "Weird good or weird bad?" "Weird good. Definitely weird good." The money from Isidor had bought Ethan time and better treatment, and slowly, so slowly she was afraid to hope he started improving. The doctors were cautiously optimistic. The medications were working. There was talk of remission, of recovery, of a future that extended beyond the next hospital stay. Brenna let herself start to believe it might actually happen. 6 months into their relationship, Isidor took her to see his real home, not the penthouse office, but the estate he'd built on the outskirts of the city, hidden behind wards and protected by vampires who'd sworn loyalty to him decades ago. It was a mansion that looked like it belonged in another century, all stone and stained glass and architectural details that spoke of old wealth and older power. "This is where you live." She turned in a slow circle, taking in the vaulted ceilings and the artwork that probably belonged in museums. "This is absurd. I've had 300 years to accumulate things." He sounded almost embarrassed. "And I like beautiful objects. You get used to it after a while." "I'm never going to get used to this." "Does it bother you?" She considered the question seriously. Did it bother her? The wealth disparity? The reminder that they came from completely different worlds? Maybe it should have. Maybe she should have felt uncomfortable or inadequate or overwhelmed by the sheer scale of everything he represented. Instead, she mostly felt curious about what it all meant to him. "Show me your favorite room." He took her to a library that made her breath catch floor-to-ceiling shelves, rolling ladders, a fireplace with chairs positioned to catch the light. Books in languages she didn't recognize, some of them so old the pages had yellowed to brown. "I started collecting these when I was first turned," he explained. "Reading was one of the few things that made immortality bearable. If you're going to live forever, you need stories to fill the time." "What's your favorite?" She ran her fingers along the spines, reverent. He pulled down a worn volume, pages soft with age. "Poetry. 14th century Italian. I knew the woman who wrote these. She was brilliant and angry and completely unappreciated in her time. I kept her work alive when everyone else forgot her." Brenna looked at him, at the care with which he held the book, at the genuine affection in his voice when he talked about a poet who'd been dead for centuries. "You're a romantic." "I'm a vampire who's seen too much death. Preserving beautiful things is how I cope." "Am I one of your beautiful things to preserve?" The question came out more serious than she'd intended, but it was something she'd been wondering for months now. Was she a person to him? Or a project? Someone he loved or something he wanted to keep? Isidor set the book down carefully and turned to face her fully. "You're not a thing, beautiful or otherwise. You're the person who makes me want to be better than I am, who makes me remember why immortality might actually be a gift instead of a curse, who looks at me and sees past the monster to whatever humanity I have left." That's not an answer. "Yes, it is. You're not something I'm preserving, Brenna. You're someone I'm choosing every single day because being with you is the best thing I've done in 300 years. She kissed him then, there in his library surrounded by centuries of accumulated stories, and felt the last of her doubts dissolve. This was real. Whatever complications came with it, whatever differences they had to navigate, this was real and good and worth fighting for. The final challenge came a year into their relationship, when Ethan finally, miraculously, went into full remission. Brenna got the news at the hospital and immediately called Isidor, sobbing too hard to form coherent sentences. He arrived within minutes, pulling her into his arms, while she shook with relief and joy and the overwhelming release of 18 months of terror. "He's going to be okay," she kept repeating. "He's actually going to be okay." I know. Isidor held her tight, his own voice rough with emotion. "You did it. You kept him alive long enough for the treatment to work. You saved him. We saved him. You and me and the doctors and—" She pulled back to look at him, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you. For everything. For the money and the support, and just being there when I needed someone. I couldn't have done this without you." "You could have. You're strong enough to do anything." But his eyes were bright too, as close to crying as vampires probably came. "But I'm glad I got to help." They celebrated that night, just the three of them, Brenna and Isidor and Ethan, who was weak but smiling, color returning to his face for the first time in months. They ordered terrible takeout and watched movies in Ethan's hospital room until the nurses made them leave, and Brenna felt something settle in her chest that had been tight and anxious for so long, she'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe normally. Everything was going to be okay. 2 weeks later, Isidor asked her to move in with him. They were in her apartment, cooking dinner together, when he said it. "I know it's a big step, And I know your lease isn't up for another few months, but I want you closer. I want to wake up metaphorically, since I don't actually sleep and know you're in the next room. I want to cook breakfast for you and hear about your day and just be part of your life in a more permanent way. Brenna set down the knife she'd been using to chop vegetables and turned to face him. You want me to move into your mansion. I want you to move into our home. I'll have your name added to the deed. You can redecorate anything you want. Bring Ethan if you'd like. Once he's released, there's more than enough space, and he shouldn't be alone while he's recovering. She stopped, overwhelmed. That's a lot. Too much? Maybe? She laughed, slightly hysterical. I'm still getting used to dating someone who's lived for 3 centuries. Moving in together feels like a really big step. We can wait. If you need more time, we can wait. But did she need more time? Brenna thought about her tiny apartment with its worn furniture and thin walls, thought about the estate with its library and gardens and rooms that could be hers to fill however she wanted, thought about waking up knowing Isidor was nearby, about not having to coordinate schedules quite so carefully, about building a life together instead of just stealing moments between his obligations and hers. I want to bring some of my own furniture, she said finally, and I'm not changing anything in the library because that room is perfect, and Ethan gets his own wing because he's 18 and needs privacy. And is that a yes? It's a yes. She smiled, feeling something bright and hopeful unfurl in her chest. Let's do this. Let's be ridiculously domestic together. He kissed her then, deep and sweet and full of promise, and Brenna thought about how strange life was. A year ago, she'd been drowning, working herself to death and watching her brother fade. Now, she was planning a future with a vampire king, and her brother was in remission, and everything felt impossibly, perfectly right. The move happened over a weekend, with help from Cassian and a few other vampires who could carry furniture like it weighed nothing. Ethan was released from the hospital the following week, and took over an entire section of the East Wing, immediately making it his own with posters and gaming equipment and the kind of cheerful chaos only teenagers could create. They settled into a routine. Brenna still worked at the diner, though only part-time now, more because she liked it than because she needed the money. Isidor continued managing his territory and his court, though he delegated more these days, preferring to spend evenings with her. Ethan started talking about college, about a future beyond hospital walls. And slowly, day by day, Brenna learned what it felt like to be happy. Not just surviving, not just getting through, actually, genuinely happy. 3 years after the first meal appeared in the break room, Isidor cooked for her again, not leaving it anonymously this time, but actually sitting down across from her at the table in their dining room, watching as she took the first bite of shepherd's pie that tasted exactly like it had that first night. Still good? He asked. Perfect. She smiled at him, this man who'd learned her schedule by heart and decided she was worth saving. Everything is perfect. Not perfect. You have gravy on your chin. Romantic. I never claimed to be romantic. You absolutely did. Remember the whole poetry thing? That was 3 years ago. I've grown crustier since then. She laughed and reached across the table to take his hand, marveling at how normal this felt now. A vampire king holding hands with a former waitress over dinner, in a mansion that was somehow home, with her brother playing video games upstairs, and their whole future stretched out ahead of them. I love you, she said, because it felt important to say it out loud. I know I don't say it enough, but I do. I love you exactly as you are. Isidor's expression went soft, almost vulnerable. I love you too, more than I thought possible, more than I knew how to want anything. So what now? Now we finish dinner. Then maybe we take a walk in the garden. Then maybe I hold you while you fall asleep, and I stay awake thinking about how impossibly lucky I am that you walked into my life and decided to stay. That sounds perfect. Not perfect, but close enough. They finished their meal in comfortable silence, and afterward did exactly what he'd suggested, walked through the garden in the moonlight, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against him. The future was uncertain, as all futures were. There would be more challenges, more complications, more moments where their different worlds collided in difficult ways. But they would face them together, and that made all the difference. Somewhere in the house, Ethan's laughter echoed, Somewhere in the city, Isidor's court conducted business in his name. Somewhere in the universe, the stars wheeled on in their eternal patterns. And in the garden, a vampire king held the woman he loved and knew, with absolute certainty, that he'd finally found something worth living forever for. Years later, when people asked Brenna how they'd met, she'd smile and say he'd brought her a warm meal after a double shift, that he'd learned her schedule by heart and decided she needed someone to take care of her for a change. It was the truth, but not all of it. The truth was also that she'd learned his rhythms too when he needed silence, when he needed company, when the weight of immortality pressed too heavily and he needed reminding that life was still worth living. That they'd built something together out of impossible circumstances and sheer stubborn determination that love was worth fighting for. That sometimes the person who saves you is actually the one who needs saving just as much. And that home wasn't a place, but a person. And she'd found hers in a vampire king who'd seen her when she'd been invisible to everyone else and decided she was worth everything.